Hi, Adrian Faccioni from Thatch Fitness. Today's video blog is a continuation of the theme of talking about core training and in particular core preparation for any sort of physical activity. Now the specific focus of today is to talk about pelvic tilting. Now as you can see from this image, there are three main sorts of pelvic tilting. The image on the left you can see is an example of a posterior pelvic tilt. Now, this is highlighted by the fact that the pelvis is, or the top of the pelvis is rotated backwards compared to the bottom of the pelvis, and also that there is a flattening of the lumbar spine, which is not particularly beneficial or helpful. The middle image is that of a neutral pelvic tilt, and that's the ideal position that we want to place our pelvis in most of the time. Now, what we typically see though is we see the image on the right-hand side, which is an anterior pelvic tilt. Now, this is highlighted by the fact that the top of the pelvis is rotated forwards and there is quite an excessive lumbar extension, which again is not particularly healthy for the lumbar vertebrae. Now, there are three main reasons why we see this anterior pelvic tilt happening so much today. Firstly is purely just an imbalance in muscle groups. So as you can see from this image, that there are, the image on the left-hand side, there are certain muscles that are involved in pelvic control, and if they are particularly strong and doing what they're supposed to do, that can then lead to the pelvis starting to rotate in an anterior direction. So these muscles include the abdominal muscles, the gluteals, and the hamstrings, which are all attached to the pelvis in different places, and if they're not particularly strong, they can allow the pelvis to start to move into a position that's not particularly ideal. Now, combined with that, you also then have, as you can see the image on the right-hand side, there are a couple of muscle groups that if they happen to be excessively tight, they also can then create this anterior pelvic tilt position. So in particular, the hip flexors and the erector spinae group, which are the muscles that run on either side of the spine, if they're tight, they can then pull the pelvis into an anterior tilted position. Now, related to the hip flexors, several of my previous video blogs have been really focused on trying to de-emphasize the use of your hip flexors when you exercise, in particular developing your core. Now, one of the reasons why is that if your exercise routine focuses on the hip flexors, these are strong muscles anyway to start with. And so by further focusing on them, you end up getting them much stronger. They then get stronger and shorter, pull on the pelvis and create a further anterior pelvic tilt position, which is not what you want. Now, the third reason why we see so much anterior pelvic tilt today is more of a social factor. There are a number of social media influencers that are in the fitness space that are particularly famous for having large backsides. Now, as you can see from this image here, this is quite a famous fitness influencer who, again, is specifically famous for the size of her backside. And if you have a look at this image, look at the manipulation of her body position to try and create an artificially large backside. Now, see that line that I've drawn? That line indicates the alignment of her pelvis to her lower back, and you see that she's created a massive anterior pelvic rotation to try and make a bum look bigger than what it really is. Now, unfortunately, I see lots of examples of members who come to my gym who spend inordinate amounts of their time just working on their backsides with the hope of creating these massive backsides that they see in these imageries, without fully understanding that there's been a total manipulation of both posture and the image to create this particular illusion. So what do we need to do? Well, there's a couple of main things. One, we need to try and strengthen those muscles that are not providing the core control we need. So that's developing your abdominals, your glutes and your hamstrings better. We need to try and lengthen out those muscles that are tight, such as your hip flexors and your erector spinae group. We need to make sure there is good balance between the front muscles and the rear muscles in terms of strength. And also, if you can learn to abdominally brace, which was last week's video blog, that will then align your pelvis in the perfect place for a neutral pelvic position, which is ideally where you want to be for the vast majority of exercises that you undertake. Now, the last thing I just want to say is that there are times when having a posterior pelvic tilt and an anterior pelvic tilt are both quite useful for certain exercises, and that'll be a sort of future topic for some videos that I'll post shortly.